Hello and welcome to the National D-Day Memorials Lunchbox Lecture today. I'm John Long, the Director of Education here at the Memorial, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to what's going to be a great talk and a very relevant one for our mission of raising awareness of the valor, fidelity, and sacrifice on D-Day and in World War II. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, who is Kathy Ehlers Metcalf. Kathy serves as the Executive Director of Education for the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. She leads the Character Education Program, working with educators and administrators across the country to distribute and encourage implementation of this vital and much needed program. Kathy is responsible for building and maintaining relationships with educators and organizations across the country, including the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, the National World War II Museum, the First Division Museum, which has a great D-Day story itself, of course, and the Freedoms Foundation at Valley Forge. And we're very pleased to add the National D-Day Memorial to that list now for you, Kathy. She works with public and private school administrators, staff, and teachers, as well as representatives of veterans organizations, and she is honored to work with the Medal of Honor recipients to perpetuate their legacy, and as you will hear in her talk, has a very special connection to the Medal of Honor. And so let's bring Kathy in, and thank you for joining us. And I will say, in case someone is just stumbling across the program and doesn't know the geography, we are in Bedford, Virginia. Kathy, you are all the way over in California, though.
Yes, sir, I am. John, thank you so much. Thank you to you and all your staff there at the National D-Day Memorial for giving me this opportunity. It's a delight to be with you today. I should warn your audience that I was a longtime teacher, and so sometimes I put on my teacher hat, and I am perfectly willing to answer questions as we get to them later. But first, I have some history to share with you. I was not a history teacher. I was an English teacher. But now I have the delightful opportunity to combine my passions. So let's get started.
We've been looking forward to this one. And
Thank you.
I'll just turn the internet over to you.
Well, thank you, sir. I am the Executive Director of Education for the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, as John mentioned, and the Society's mission is to honor the sacrifice and inspire the future. A little about the Society itself. It is the fraternal organization of Medal of Honor recipients, meaning that it is made up of entirely and only Medal of Honor recipients. We now have staff. Over the years, as the Society grew, they realized that it would be helpful to have some hired help. So they started out with an administrative staff, secretary or two, somebody to answer phones and take care of travel vouchers and things like that. And now as the program has grown, we also have programs. So the staff now oversees things like health and welfare of Medal of Honor recipients as best we can. There are archives at the Medal of Honor Society, whose headquarters is on the Yorktown in South Carolina. And we have programs for legacy, both outreach programs to facilitate Medal of Honor recipients going and speaking to organizations and corporations throughout the country, and of course for education. And that is my specific oversight, to be able to oversee the education programs. The Society is, we are all honored to be able to work for Medal of Honor recipients. We currently have only 66 living Medal of Honor recipients. And I think that that's an extremely important number for all of us to be aware of. Only about half of those still do much traveling and public speaking. And those that do, needless to say, are in great demand and very busy. The character education program that is the focal point of the education department is mainly for secondary students, middle and high school students, but we also have a slightly smaller elementary program. The secondary program is lessons of character based on stories of Medal of Honor recipients. And the program I want to mention is entirely free. So if you are an educator or know educators or have children with whom you'd like to share these stories or lessons that go with them, You can do that via www.cmohs.org, and that will be popping up on your screen occasionally. The lessons are all there. They are all free. The Medal of Honor Society, when they commissioned this program, wanted it to be accessible for all so that it is fully equitable, and therefore the program is provided entirely online and it is free, and you can learn more about it at our website. So the connection between the Congressional Medal of Honor Society and the National D-Day Memorial is, from my perspective, twofold. Inherently, the fact that a number of Medal of Honor recipients were awarded the medal for their actions on D-Day and also for the Normandy campaign immediately following the invasion itself. In addition to that, John mentioned a connection, and that is that my dad is one of the Normandy Campaign Medal of Honor recipients. What was one of them? He passed away in 2014. I was very lucky to have him until he was just shy of 93 years old. But I'd like to share with you a little about a variety of the recipients who were awarded for the Normandy campaign, and also for the other heroes who were there. That's why our talk today was entitled Many Kinds of Heroes. And that's that, as my dad always said, a Medal of Honor doesn't happen in a vacuum, that there were many other people there who may have also deserved a medal, but maybe nobody was left to tell their tale. And so he and all the Medal of Honor recipients are always the first to recognize that they wear that medal on behalf of all those who were there with them. That said, a little more about the medal itself. It is a combat medal. It is specifically awarded for actions in combat against an enemy of the United States. And of course, in a campaign, the scope of the Normandy campaign, we could expect such awards. And yet, in spite of that, the thousands and thousands of Americans who landed, and it is specifically an American award. Other countries have parallel awards. But in spite of the tens of thousands, the close to 10,000 Americans that landed just on June 6th alone, fewer than 20 Medals of Honor were awarded during the Normandy campaign. Medal of Honor awards, by the way, are a process. Not only do they not happen in a vacuum, but they require eyewitnesses. And the award is generally for a specific action. It is not generally awarded for a career, although there have been a few exceptions to that. But it is awarded for a moment in combat, for a moment in time when, for the sake of the mission and for the comrades in arms, an individual went above and beyond the call of duty. And those are the words that you always hear, that the Medal of Honor is for gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. So the Normandy medals are representative of Medals of Honor as a whole. They are greatly diverse. This is combat, not specifically for enlisted or for officers. So of these many kinds of heroes, there are also many who were never recognized with medals. But first, let's look at some of the Medal of Honor recipients. And I'm going to take this chronologically. My information comes from mainly from the Medal of Honor Society's website. And so if you want to go back and look at what is there, there's plenty of more information there. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans also has a phenomenal archive and lots of information specifically about, of course, the Normandy invasion. That museum started not as the World War II Museum, but as specifically the D-Day Museum. So you can find a lot there. I want to start with the medals that were awarded for June 6th. Now, remember I mentioned it was that there is a process. So somebody has to nominate the individual for the award, and then that award has to be approved on up through the branch. And now generally it goes clear to the chief of staff and then eventually to the president himself. During World War II, some of the medals were awarded much more quickly because of the nature of the war and trying to get awards out. But most of these awards that I'm going to talk about, particularly those that were posthumous, were awarded to family members much later. So there is a distinction between the date of action, which I will refer to, and the date of award. More or less chronologically, on June 6th, Jimmy Monteith with the 16th Infantry Division of the 1st Infantry Division landed with the first wave. And those of you who've seen Saving Private Ryan, those who were pinned down on the beach at that very start of the movie were primarily the 16th Infantry of the 1st Infantry Division and the 116th of the 29th Infantry Division. And Monteith landed there with his comrades amongst that. And his action was helping to organize that chaos on the beach, helping to get people up and moving out of being pinned down on the sand and to move to action. And that included organizing tank fire, getting a couple of tanks set up. He led an assault up the hill. Sadly, once they got in place, the 26-year-old Monteith was killed by enemy fire. Their position was overrun. For his fearless leadership and for his great sacrifice, he would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Meanwhile, on the beach, 32-year-old radio operator John Pender came ashore with the 29th Infantry Division. And in the landing, as happened to so many of the soldiers who came ashore that day, his equipment was swamped and spread around in the surf. And amid the fire and amid the wounded, and though wounded himself multiple times, John Pender returned to the water to reclaim his equipment, to gather up enough to be able to establish communication on the beach. And that, as you might imagine, was absolutely crucial, both to those who were already on the beach, those who were trying to work their way off the beach inland, and to those who still needed to come ashore. His work was vital to the mission, and in that work, he too gave his life. I strongly recommend that you go read his citation at cmohs.org. It's also, of course, on the military sites, the Army. You'll find his citation there. Pender's citation is overwhelming and inspiring. It's as they all are, but his particularly struck me that he was able to maintain the presence of mind to be able to try to carry out the specific job without a weapon in his hand, but rather trying to organize a radio in the midst of that chaos. Another who came ashore on June 6th was Carlton Barrett. He was with the 18th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division, which happened to be the same company that my dad was in. Carlton Barrett also went back into the surf, but he went back into the surf to pull the wounded and drowning out of the water. As many of you know, that the landing didn't go necessarily absolutely as they hoped it would. And there are sandbars on beaches. And so when some landing craft thought they were as far in as they could go, they may actually have struck a sandbar. The ramp went down, the guys ran off, and on the other side of the sandbar was deeper water. And if you can imagine carrying the amount of equipment they were carrying, and not all of them necessarily being particularly strong swimmers. These were, after all, soldiers, not sailors or SEALs. And many were indeed personally swamped and drowned, not to mention wounded as they came out of the landing craft. So Carlton Barrett returned to the water time and again to pull those people out of the water. And also on the beach, he then helped organize action out of the chaos. He helped the wounded, and his citation says, and I quote, "He arose as a leader." Amazingly, Carlton Barrett survived and went on to live until the 1980s. So he was able to appreciate being awarded the Medal of Honor and to live out of a full life. Another award for June 6th went to Theodore Roosevelt Jr., and he was awarded for his actions of leadership on the beach during that day and thereafter. Roosevelt survived the invasion itself, although sadly at the age of 57, he succumbed to a heart attack in July of 1944. I would point out that part of his citation is that like many Medal of Honor citations that are on the fine line between heroism and court-martial because they often involve doing something that one has been told is either too dangerous or impossible. He repeatedly challenged orders to stay on the boat and asked again and again and was finally granted permission to go ashore. And so he chose to be on the beach with the men leading from the front. So those were the medals that were awarded for actions actually on June 6th. The rest of these that I'm going to talk about came ashore on June 6th as well, but they were the medals were awarded for actions later. On June 8th, Frank Perigori, in close combat with the enemy, captured 32 Germans and advanced to drive up the hill into the trenches. He survived his action. Sadly, he died June 14th in battle, well before he could be awarded the Medal of Honor for his June 8th actions. And he was 29 years old. Later, his medal was given to his widow, sadly. A very common story. On June 9th, Joe Gandera and Charles de Glopper, ages 20 and 22 respectively, earned Medals of Honor. Gandera was killed later in June in action, and de Glopper was killed outright in his action. Neither of them would ever know that they had been awarded the Medal of Honor for the things that they did. June 9th and 10th, Walter David Ehlers, who was 24, was awarded a Medal of Honor, was in action against the enemy in hedgerow fighting in France. That's my dad. I will tell you more about him later. Obviously, he survived. June 10th, Arthur DeFranzo, the 18th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division as well, led an advance. He was 25 years old and sadly was killed in action. If you are hearing a common theme here, the number of Medals of Honor that resulted in the actions resulted directly in the death of the person for whom they were awarded runs close to 50% from World War II forward, World War I forward, actually. June 11th, Robert Cole, who was 29 years old, led a bayonet charge to take bridges. And I don't have the exact details right here in front of me, but he may have come in with the paratroopers. He was more further inland. He amazingly survived that charge. Again, he was killed in action September 18th, 1944. Those are the primary medals that were awarded within the first 3 weeks after D-Day. There were several other medals awarded within the Normandy campaign, including Carlos Ogden, who later became a close friend of my dad and who I knew as long as I can remember. And also, let's see, I have to go to my next page here for notes. By the way, we have an archivist at the Medal of Honor Society who could probably do this off the top of her head. So if you need help, talk to Laura at the Medal of Honor Society. John Butts also for that later in June. And then there were additional Normandy campaign medals awarded for actions into July. Those stories are written up in Medal of Honor citations, so you can read the Army's version of them. Each of those versions is a summary of the action, and the paperwork behind them was written up by those who were in the trenches with them. And so there are files in Army records or now with the relatives of these people, or perhaps, I hope, more in museums, of the full eyewitness accounts that go into these citations. Those are things that a good researcher can go find, and you can read for yourselves the amazing tales of heroism, keeping in mind that the people who wrote them up were there too, and therefore were inherently part of the action. And I'd like to now turn and talk a little bit about the other heroes. By the end of the day on June 6, 1944, the town of Bedford, Virginia, had lost 19 of its young citizens. Amongst those, there were 3 pairs of brothers. Amongst those who went from Bedford were 3 pairs of brothers, and 4 of those 6 died, meaning one family lost both boys. Every one of those boys was a hero. So was the whole town of Bedford. And in fact, so were all the families that went behind, who made those sacrifices, who did the work to make sure that the men on the front line had the support they needed, both the physical support and the emotional support. Heroism happens when it is necessary. These people went. Some of them were drafted. Some of them, like my dad and his brother, joined up. Their third brother was drafted, but they went. They went when the country called them. They went when the town sent them. They and their families made sacrifices. My family's story is almost the whole picture. It's a little bit of so many of the stories, and it parallels so many families, so many towns, so many communities. Because of that, it was actually featured in Ken Burns' The War, not in the stories of the whole towns, but in little clips in between, because it kind of ties all those together. So I want to share a little bit of that story with you. My dad and his oldest brother joined the army in 1940. Their grandfather, who was of German descent and who had lived in Germany before World War I, still had relatives there, said, "There's war coming. We see it coming." And of course, the Great Depression was going on. All the boys couldn't find work. They were farm families. They were suffering the cost of the Depression. So the oldest brother, Roland, who was 23 at the time, said, "I'm joining the military." My dad, who was the youngest of the three boys, they also had three younger sisters, said, "If you're going, I'm going." He was 19. He had to go back home and get his mother's signature in order to join. Dad said, "If you're going, you're going," and signed. And his mom said, looked him in the eye and said, "I'll join on the condition that you promise me that if you're going to be a soldier, you be a Christian soldier." My dad said he didn't know what that meant, but he thought about it every time he thought about getting into trouble. And he would be shooting daggers at me if I didn't share that story. He always shared that story about his mom, that he felt like her spirit was always there with him as he went through the war. He and Roland, the oldest brother, fought through North Africa together, and they fought through Sicily together. And sometime while they were doing that, their middle brother was drafted and sent to the South Pacific. So my grandmother had all three sons in the Army overseas, and she herself and two of the three sisters went to work. One sister was too young. She was in elementary school, but the other sisters went to work at Fort Riley. They were from Kansas. They went to work at Fort Riley, supporting the troops there. Roland, my dad's older brother, was wounded in Sicily and sent back to England to recuperate, and my dad rejoined him there after the Sicily campaign. And then they were headed to Normandy, France. Up until that time, the two of them had served together in the same platoon. They were bunkmates. They were bunkmates through basic training. They were on leave together on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor. They returned to the base and were sent out on additional training. And then they were sent to North Africa together, where they barely escaped capture in the fight against Rommel and his tank forces. When they went into Sicily, they were digging in for the battle, and our coordinates for our Navy were a little bit off, and the artillery from the Navy hit the hillside above them, and Roland was buried by a cave-in, and my dad dug him out, saved his life, and that's when Roland was injured and evacuated. So they had literally been side by side throughout two major campaigns. Before the Normandy campaign, their commanding officer called them in and mentioned the Sullivan brothers, all five brothers who died on the same ship in the Pacific, and said, we are expecting 50% casualties. We do not want brothers together. So he pulled my dad out and assigned him a separate platoon. He asked them to increase their life insurance to the maximum amount, and they went on training for the invasion. And indeed, on June 6th, my dad's platoon was sent in. They had been housed on a headquarters ship, so they wanted them off of there as soon as possible, because I would imagine they were just sort of in the way. But they were sent in when the 16th and 116th were pinned down on the beach. Dad said they landed between those two divisions, and he said every time somebody hollered 16th move out, everybody got up and went because of the closeness of those numbers. And he said some really amazing beach masters helped him get his entire platoon up off the beach without a casualty. That and a whole lot of prayers and some good luck. So he was able to do that. When the second wave came in, my uncle's landing craft launched off the ship they were on. As they approached the beach, they were hit by a mortar. And here's how it went from there on. My grandmother was a keeper of things. She, in doing so, probably had no idea that she was saving family history. So I'm going to read some snippets of telegrams and letters to you so that you can see. This is the Western Union telegram that was sent to her. Now, she, of course, got up to newspapers and radio announcements on June 6th saying that we had invaded Normandy. And she knew that both my dad and Roland were in England. She just didn't know when this was going to happen. This telegram is dated July 5th, 1944, to Mrs. Marie Ehlers. Regret to inform you your son, Sergeant Roland A. Ehlers, was seriously wounded in action 6 June in France. Letter containing present mail address follows. The Adjutant General. The same day, I'm sure immediately, Grandma wrote, Dearest son, God bless you is my prayer. Received telegram this morning about you being wounded. But bless your heart, I still see your blue eyes twinkling, your manly shoulders squared, ready to fight the great battle. And when you come home, son, you will still be my boy, brave and good. Same day, 5th July, 1944, to Mrs. Marie Ehlers. Dear Mrs. Ehlers, I am sorry it was necessary to send my recent telegram, which this letter is confirming. Your son, Sergeant Roland A. Ehlers, was seriously wounded in action on 6 June 1944 in France. Theater commanders are instructed to submit to the War Department periodic reports of progress, and accordingly, you will be kept informed of his progress promptly as these reports are received. However, as I am sure you will realize, such reports must of necessity be brief and therefore will contain information on his condition or progress, but will not include information concerning the nature of wounds in the case of wounded personnel. I can assure you that our hospitalized soldiers serving overseas are receiving the very best medical care and attention, and it is hoped that a favorable report in his case will be received in the near future. Knowing your desire to have a letter reach him as soon as possible, you should use the following temporary address. Signed, the Adjutant General. 2 days later, July 7th, 1944, my grandfather wrote, Dearest son, I thought I would drop you a few lines as we are all well and hope you are getting along just fine and that you will be able to come home before long. We heard you were injured in the invasion and hope it isn't so serious, and that you will still come home to us, no matter what your condition is. I think you have done your share. July 14th. Dear son, how are you today? Hope you are improving just fine. Write and let us know how you are. It sure would help, for we are anxious to know. And then my grandma, this is Grandpa, actually went on to write about the corn, the crops, what's going on with the nieces and nephews at home. And he closes, he says, I want you to know that farmers are working harder than ever. They are doing their best to produce enough to feed half the world. I can tell you that, but hope that things will ease up after this war is over and that some of you boys will come back before long. As ever, your dad. June 22nd, Grandma wrote, Dearest son, God bless you is my prayer. How are you today? I am still longing for a letter. So when some kind nurse or dear friend has time, let them drop your line to me from you. I know you are okay, son. I always picture you're brave and true and a real fighting soldier. I talked to one of the boys back here from the 30th Infantry. He was wounded a number of times, but is getting along okay. Love and kisses, your mother. That letter was written July 22nd. On July 28th, Grandma got this telegram. The Secretary of the War asks that I assure you of his deep sympathy in the loss of your son. Sergeant Roland A. Ehlers report received states that he died 6 June in France as a result of wounds received in action. Those letters that I just read you clips from were written after Roland was already dead. And that last one that Grandpa wrote that was mailed on July 14th came back to them like this: stamped deceased. That was a common story. It was a very common story. The scene in Saving Private Ryan that is filmed looking out a screen door onto a front porch. When I saw that movie, it looked like it could have been filmed from my grandma's house. And in that scene of the movie, the Western Union delivery man comes across the sidewalk and turns and comes up to the house. I caught my breath because when I saw that movie, I had already read these letters. When I found them, I put them in chronological order and read through them. So I realized that Grandma and Grandpa, I of course knew that my uncle had been killed in action, but Grandma and Grandpa were writing these letters without knowing of his condition. And the emotional power of that was really something. And to know that they were certainly not alone in this, and that there would be more telegrams. I thought of that scene with the telegram guy coming up, and I thought, why did my grandma not slam the door in his face? Because there were more telegrams. There is a telegram that said, "We regret to inform you that your son, Walter D. Ehlers, was wounded in action on June 10th, 1944 in France." There's another one from October. "We regret to inform you your son, Walter D. Ehlers, was wounded in France." And yet again in May of 1945, "We regret to inform you that your son, Walter D. Ehlers, was wounded in action." The sacrifices abroad and at home were intense. And it's just hard for us to imagine these days the price that was paid for the freedoms that we enjoy now. That wound in October of 1944 was severe enough to send my dad. The June 9th and 10th, his Medal of Honor action wound was, they patched him up on site and he refused to be evacuated. He stayed in the battle. But in October, he was hurt too badly to continue and was sent to the American hospital in Paris, where he recovered and got orders to go back to the front, as was standard in World War II. If you were well enough to fight, you went back to the front. So he headed to the train, and as he was getting on the train, he grabbed a copy of the Stars and Stripes. And when he opened it up, there in the bottom of the front page of the newspaper was an article about so big that had a headline that said, "Staff Sergeant to be awarded the Medal of Honor." It was about him. He had not heard. And like I said, as is typical of Medals of Honor, he had no idea. And the soldier sitting across from him in the train leaned around his newspaper and said, "Hey, Ehlers, I'm reading here that your brother's being awarded the Medal of Honor." My dad said, "Yeah, I just read that too." He knew by then that his brother was dead. When my dad got back to the front lines, the commanding officer on site called him by name. He said that was rather startling. He didn't know anybody knew his name. And he said, and told him, "Ehlers, you're supposed to be in Washington getting the Medal of Honor from the president." And he said, "Yes, sir. I was just reading that in the Stars and Stripes, but my orders said to come here." So they scheduled a press conference, and this is probably my favorite picture ever of my dad in uniform. This was from the press conference. He was 24 years old when he landed on Omaha Beach. And this was the press conference that fall, December. He was sent back to Paris shortly thereafter, and General John C.H. Lee awarded him the Medal of Honor at his office in Paris. And then, for the first time since Thanksgiving of 1940, my dad went home. He was home for Christmas. He had a month's leave, and then he was had been given a battlefield commission to first lieutenant and was put on the Queen Elizabeth, which had been outfitted as a troop transport during the war, put on the Queen Elizabeth in charge of a whole bunch of brand new recruits that were going into the battle. And in January, on that ship, he returned to Europe, rejoined the division. He said probably the Medal of Honor saved his life because while he was home that Christmas, the 1st Infantry Division was fighting the Battle of the Bulge. So he went back to the war, and as I mentioned, was wounded again in May, and on June, or it would have been in April. On May 7th, his 25th birthday, he was, I'm sorry, I've got that wrong. On May 7th of 1945, it was his 24th birthday. He was on rest and recuperation, recovering from that wound when armistice was announced. And he wrote home to his mother and said, by the time you get this letter, you will have heard that armistice is announced, but the war won't be over for us until the Japanese surrender. And he stayed in Europe, indeed, through October of 1945, when he and his brother in the Pacific both finally went home. So that is our family story. This is, and John will show you later, I think, the picture that is well known of my dad and his brother and their mom, but this is them with their dad when they were home Thanksgiving of 1940, right before they went overseas for the first time. That would be the last time that my grandpa saw his oldest son. And this was taken at Fort Lewis, Washington in 1941. That's my dad's brother, the one who was killed in action on Omaha Beach. The Bedford boys were heroes. And my dad always said in his living history, and in fact, his living history is on the Medal of Honor website. It's a very short one. There are other interviews that are much longer and therefore more fully tell the story. But he says at the end of the living history that's on the Medal of Honor, Congressional Medal of Honor Society website, people call me a hero, but I don't think of myself as a hero. My brother was the real hero. He made the ultimate sacrifice. And my dad, who was a good friend of the Bedford Memorial and who attended the dedication of the memorial and who always told me he thought it was the most beautiful memorial to the D-Day sacrifices that he had ever seen. He said they were the heroes. And I would like to take a minute. My dad, because he was awarded the Medal of Honor, had the incredible privilege and opportunity to attend the 50th anniversary of the Normandy invasion, so the commemorative ceremonies. And as part of that, President Clinton asked him to deliver the keynote address. This, by the way, is his Medal of Honor, along with his Purple Heart with 2 clusters, his Bronze Star, his Silver Star, which I still don't know. Maybe someone in the military will explain to me why a Silver Star is gold. And then he also was awarded the King George Medal, which is the highest award that the British Empire gives to non-citizens. But I have a copy of my dad's speech here, and I can't deliver it the way he did, standing on that windy, miserable beach on June 6th, 1994. And the reason I say miserable then is that my dad, who never got sick, I remember he had the flu during the flu epidemic in the maybe 1968, probably. That's the only time I ever remember him being sick. And he got the worst cold of his life when he was ready to deliver this speech. So it was an interesting challenge for him. But this is what he read on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1994. Good afternoon. What a peaceful, pleasant place this is today. How different it is from 50 years ago when I and many of you and many thousands of our comrades approached this shore. What was it like on D-Day is the most asked question of veterans who were here then. We will surely all agree that it was the longest day of our lives. We prepared for D-Day in England. I was not new to battle, having survived the North Africa and Sicily invasions where my brother and I fought side by side. Still, I remember my amazement when we came into the Southampton area prior to our embarkation. Rows and rows of tanks, artillery guns, trucks, jeeps, armored personnel carriers, and warehouses of logistical supplies lined England's lush fields. The harbors were so filled with boats that we could have walked their length stepping from craft to craft. I suddenly appreciated the United States' support of the war effort. We were the men on the front line, but the hard work of our mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers still at home, made this tremendous military operation feasible. We came on our feet, but we brought their hearts and prayers with us. A final battalion briefing readied us for the invasion. My brother and I had been assigned to different companies, and as the briefing ended, we waved to each other. We would make the landing from separate ships. What was it like on D-Day? 2 days later, when the ship I was on pulled out, we certainly were not alone. There were ships in front of us and to each side of us for as far as we could see. By the time we were partway across, the ships behind us seemed not to end. We looked skyward, where planes from horizon to horizon headed toward Europe. When we got near the beaches, battleships and cruisers were firing toward shore. We could hear bombs exploding in the distance. There was such firepower from the ships and planes that we didn't expect much resistance on the beach. I believe a lot of us wondered how anyone on shore could have survived the onslaught of that massive firepower. What was it like on D-Day? My platoon boarded an assault craft to approach the beach. Luckily for us, the Germans were concentrating their firepower on larger landing craft. When we hit a sandbar, the ramp went down, and as soon as we left the boat, we were in water to our armpits. For the shorter personnel, it was deeper. We waded and scrambled toward shore. What was it like on D-Day? We found men pinned down on the beach, many wounded or killed, and many terrified, all surrounded by ruined and swamped landing craft. The dead and wounded soldiers, the wreckage, the ability of the enemy to cause so much damage made us realize that this war, with its noise of mines detonating, airplanes' continuous roar, mortar shells bursting on the beach, rifle and machine gun fire, ripping holes in the sand and splashing in the water, this war was far from over. However, D-Day turned the tide. Sadly, it was the end of the war for a great many brave men who died here that day. But it was also the beginning of the end of the war for Hitler. The world changed on June 6, 1944, the day the good guys took charge again. It did not mean peace, but it marked the stand for freedom that would continue through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Allied containment of Iraq. The spirit of D-Day carried momentum across the hedgerows of France, through the Ardennes, and the Battle of the Bulge. It put new hope in the battle-weary troops in the Pacific. While we braved these then fortified beaches to beat back Hitler and to liberate Europe, to stop his massacres and to rescue his prisoners, we fought for much more than that. We fought to preserve what our forefathers had died for. We picked up our guns to protect our faith, to preserve our liberty. Our purpose went well beyond aiding our allies as they faced the German Blitz. It was to save our way of life for our parents and siblings and home, for our children and the children we hope to have, and for their children. It has been a way of life that was worth fighting for. We have enjoyed the longest period of world peace in modern history. We relish new spectrums of religious, racial, and political tolerance. We are free of the tyrannies of the likes of Hitler. We must not forget, however, what this freedom cost. We earned that security with our sweat and blood, some of us with our lives. Much of it was earned right here in Normandy. Many of those who enjoy freedom know little of its price. This anniversary, this was in 1994, must be not only a remembrance, but a new beginning. Many of us still live with D-Day, but never talk about it. We need to talk about it, not for ourselves, but for those who weren't here, not to the media, but to the heirs of our accomplishments, those we did it for. Our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren must know the price of freedom. I pray that the price we paid on this beach will never be mortgaged, that my grandsons and granddaughters will never face the terror and horror that we faced here. But they must know that without freedom, there is no life, and that the things most worth living for may sometimes demand dying for. Today, 50 years later, the beaches are quiet. We come back to mourn our losses and to celebrate our successes. Our presence here commemorates our comrades' lives, and it validates the sacrifice we all made on D-Day. What was it like on D-Day? That wave in Southampton, England was the last time I saw my brother. He died here on Omaha Beach. That we can be here today proves that it was not in vain. Thank you all for your interest in D-Day, for carrying on what my dad asked for, that we not forget. John, if you're there, if we have questions, I'm willing to take questions.
Wow, what a great speech. That's a tremendous program. Thank you. Here's the picture that you mentioned. It's on my tablet, so I don't know how well you'll be able to see it watching online, but that are the Ehlers boys with their mom. And of course, Gold Star moms are a special kind of hero as well. Yes. And so we appreciate that. And also, I'll share a couple of other photos that we have, and these are actually on display normally just a few feet away from where I am in an exhibit on Bob Slaughter, our founder. But here is your dad with Bob Slaughter, who founded the National D-Day Memorial, a chaplain, and of course in the middle, President Bill Clinton. And this is a very important moment actually in our history, because Bob Slaughter had started our foundation for a D-Day Memorial about 7 years before this. This is in 1994 at the 50th anniversary. And the effort is sort of limping along because, just wasn't getting a lot of traction yet. But Bob's appearance there with your father, with the president on Omaha Beach, really gave a push to the fundraising. It wasn't long after this that Bedford contacted Bob about bringing the memorial to Bedford. And then also, just a few years after that, 2001, here is the dedication with President George Bush. And I know it's probably can't see a lot of detail, but Bob Slaughter and your father are here saying the Pledge of Allegiance with the president again. So although, your father's not with us, and I'm not sure how many often he was able to return to the memorial, he is a big part of our story as well. And we appreciate you sharing his story with our audience. We do have a few questions that have come in, and I understand that some people have had problems with putting questions in. I apologize for that. We did get one texted to me, a couple texted to me, because the chat feature didn't seem to be working. But one is, how many times did your father return to Normandy after the war?
Well, he was very, very fortunate. The medal bought him some privileges in that regard. In 1964, 20 years after the war, he was working as a veterans benefits counselor at the hospital in Long Beach, California. My mom was a stay-at-home housewife, and she got a call from the Johnson White House saying that they would like my dad to join the official delegation for the 20th anniversary ceremonies. So at that time, Air Force One was indeed just one plane marked Air Force One, and the president sent his plane to the West Coast to pick up Carlos Ogden in Northern California, and then my parents in Southern California. And so Carlos and Louise Ogden and my mom and dad joined General Omar Bradley and his wife and a few other people, and they went to France for that ceremony. The wives got to stay in Paris and shop, but they first stopped in Washington for a meeting with the president in the Rose Garden. So that was a very special trip. And then I don't believe he returned to France until the 40th anniversary when President Reagan was in office, and he was not part of the official delegation that year. There were still a lot of surviving D-Day veterans, and my dad's part in that was that People magazine invited him to go with them, and they took him not just to the American Battlefield Cemetery there, but also along the beach and through the towns of Normandy, where they met with local citizens, both who remembered the invasion itself and with local school children. And they did an extensive article in People magazine that June of 1984 featuring my dad returning to France. So that was a special trip for him. And then, of course, the 50th anniversary, which you and I just talked about, and gratefully you have pictures of that. And then because interest in World War II really kicked up as people realized more and more that we were losing our World War II veterans, Dad went back with a couple of different military programs. He went with I think it was the Military Channel or else the History Channel that did a special program, and it's called The Day After D-Day. It still airs now and again, usually in the vicinity of May, June, on some of the military and history channels. And that time he was allowed to take a guest, and he took my then 17-year-old son with him. So we have some priceless footage of my dad and one of my boys there. He also went back with Channel 1 News that did specifically programs for high schools, and they did a program called The Boys Who Won the War. And my older son actually got to go with him on that trip, and then I got to accompany him. He went back for the 60th anniversary of D-Day, and he was a guest of the World War II Museum on that trip. So that was a great trip. So 5 or 6 times, always an official delegations. I don't believe he ever went back by himself. But I do have to tell you that standing on that beach with anybody who landed on it, and I grew up here in Southern California where our beaches fall off rather quickly into deep water. So you don't have to go out very far. You can bring boats in pretty close, and the shoreline is narrow before you get to things. You stand on that beach at Omaha and see how much open space they had to cover to make that shore is just, it's amazing. Sorry, long answer.
Not questions, but a couple of comments come in from Hannah. Says this is beyond beautiful, deep, and heartfelt, and says, Kathy, you are a phenomenal speaker.
Well, thank you.
You have a fan. Another question, though. Where is your uncle buried? Is he in Normandy?
He was buried during the war. He was interred there in Normandy, but families of this is, by the way, I'm going to sidebar here. A lot of people don't know. I didn't realize it until I got there. A good many of the graves at the American Cemetery in Normandy remain basically unmarked, and the markers on them say known but to God. So for those families whose soldiers were identified and whose graves were marked, they had the opportunity, if they wished, to ask that their deceased bodies be brought home. So Roland was buried at the American Cemetery in Normandy until his family had the opportunity to bring him home, and he is now interred in Sunset Cemetery in Manhattan, Kansas. I visited there just a couple of years ago with my daughter. I had never been to his grave. What I did not know was that he is interred between his parents. They were buried on either side of him decades later.
Excellent. Let me ask another question, a little bit off the subject of Normandy, but certainly on the subject of the medal. And it's February as we're recording this, so Black History Month. Tell us about African American recipients of the Medal of Honor in World War II.
There were not a lot, and some of them were late awards. And this is where you'd want to contact Laura Jowdy at the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. and talk to her about that. Also, the National World War II Museum did a special display of traveling medals of honor. Keep in mind that there had been heavily segregated troops for a very long time. And so you didn't have necessarily those people, didn't have African Americans landing with the others at the same time on Normandy. But one thing that we have tried to do is go back and right those wrongs and make sure that appropriate awards are made. You'll see that there are more medals awarded when our Army was fully integrated in Vietnam. And so we have a number of Vietnamese African American recipients. And now, of course, unfortunately, there are still awards being passed out for current conflicts, but there are also in the War on Terror. We always
thank you. Yeah, it was an interesting history, certainly during that time, and people often forget that this was a segregated military in World War II. But I think that helped to push some of the post-war civil rights changes.
Absolutely, and in fact, I think one of my absolute favorite Medal of Honor stories is a Korean War story, and that is, I mentioned earlier that oftentimes a medal is awarded on that fine line between heroism and court-martial. And in Korea, when we were making moves toward being better about integrating our forces, Navy pilot, Navy pilot Tom Hudner was good friends with a gentleman named Jesse Brown, who was an African American pilot, and they were flying separate airplanes in the same action. And Jesse's plane went down on a hillside in Korea. And Tom said he, in his living history, again, cmohs.org, he made the decision to execute a wheels up landing to see if as he flew over, he could see that Jesse was still alive, but he appeared to be trapped in his plane. So Tom chose to make what he described as a wheels up landing, which when I present that to teachers and students, they always think about it for a minute. And he intentionally crash landed his airplane to try to save his friend, Jesse Brown. And unfortunately, Jesse did not survive, but Tom made the effort to save him. And when Tom was awarded his Medal of Honor for that effort, Jesse Brown's widow was his guest at the ceremony.
Wow. Great story. Oh, no more questions have come in, but more accolades. Thanking you for a phenomenal talk, and we appreciate that and all the information. Once again, cmohs.org, correct?
Yes, that's our website. And let me mention, I earlier was talking about teachers and students. If you go to that website, just recently we added a lesson specifically about D-Day, and that is, I believe, lesson C13. It's in the Courage section. So if you go there, you will find that in the education section, there is a lesson that features 4 posthumous Medal of Honor recipients in the D-Day campaign. So you'll also find that we have the program is also available in print, and it looks like this, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we feature all the recipients. And that was just Jimmy Monteith that I just looked by there. In fact, lots of stories about World War II and up through all the conflicts. And we're also making an effort to make sure that we incorporate and feature those late awards and even some of the early awards. There are a number of African American awards from the Civil War. Keep in mind, when you look at awards from those earlier years, you'll find that oftentimes the citation is only 1 sentence long because the medal was not codified until World War I. And that's one reason that in World War II, you have the expanded stories in the citations of what these people did that earned them the Medal of Honor. Some really, really great stories that show the values embodied in the medal, which the recipients themselves recognized as courage, commitment, sacrifice, integrity, citizenship, and patriotism. And those values are the core of the Medal of Honor character development education lessons, and they fall in line with your values there in your mission at the National D-Day Museum, National D-Day Memorial, and in turn, the National World War II Museum, where our joint mission is to preserve that legacy that we all benefit from so heavily.
Absolutely. And living in a day when the World War II generation is so quickly fading, I think it's all the more important to keep their memories alive. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a mutual friend who has been here, the last Medal of Honor recipient still living from World War II, Woody Williams, Herschel Woody Williams, who is just a phenomenal individual. And if you ever get a chance to look up his story, not just during the war, but afterwards, just one of the men that I've been just truly honored to meet a couple of times. And so,
absolutely. I've known, because of my close relationship with my dad and the opportunity to travel with him so much before I ever went to work for the society. As I mentioned, I was a teacher for decades. Excuse me. I have a fun short story about Woody. Pre-pandemic, we were trying to get the character development program out to a lot of youth organizations such as the YMCA, YWCA, all of the organizations, including Scouting. And we had the opportunity to do presentations at World Scout Jamboree there in Virginia, in West Virginia. And so at that event, there were 44,000 scouts, boys and girls, from not just the United States, but all over the world. And I engaged some Medal of Honor recipients to attend with us. And one of them was Woody Williams. And we have pictures of Woody Williams meeting with scouts from all over the world at World Jamboree 3 years ago. And Woody is truly, he is the last, but we couldn't ask for a better representative for the generation of World War II veterans, and specifically the Medal of Honor recipients from World War II.
absolutely. So I think we agree. Certainly, many heroes wore and wear today that medal, but many heroes did not. And so for the D-Day generation, we honor them all here. And Kathy, I hope you will come and visit us sometime when you're on the East Coast.
I would very much like to do that. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity today.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And again, you can check out the Medal of Honor Society webpage and, of course, dday.org for more information about D-Day, about our activities, our upcoming programs, and check back frequently with both web pages to find out more about what's going on. But we'll cut you loose now. We appreciate all of you who have been watching. And Kathy, especially appreciate you sharing your family story and the story of the other heroes.
Thank you.